My partner gets triggered when I am lazy. How do I get him to overcome this? That's the question I posted on Reddit 6 months ago, thinking it was just a small relationship bump we could work through. I had no idea that this seemingly innocent issue would unravel everything I thought I knew about love, respect, and what it means to truly care for someone. My name is Violet, I'm 34 years old, and for the longest time, I believed that love meant pushing each other to be better, even when it hurt. Let me take you back to where Bennett and I first met. It was 2.5 years ago at a local running club's charity 5K event. I had just started getting back into running after recovering from a knee injury that had sidelined me from my triathlon training. The morning was crisp, perfect for a run, and I was feeling nervous about getting back out there after months of physical therapy. Bennett was standing near the registration table, stretching his calves against a tree, wearing professional running gear that looked like it cost more than my monthly grocery budget. He had this confident energy about him, the kind of person who seemed to have life figured out. When our eyes met, he flashed this brilliant smile and jogged over. "First time with this group?" he asked, his breathing perfectly steady despite having just finished what looked like warm-up sprints. "I'm Bennett. I've been running with them for about a year now. Great community." I introduced myself, explaining that I was coming back from an injury. Instead of the usual awkward response most people give, Bennett's eyes lit up with understanding. "MCL and meniscus?" he asked, pointing to my knee brace. "I had the same thing 2 years ago. Rock climbing accident. The comeback is tough, but you'll get there. Just listen to your body." That moment felt like fate. Here was someone who understood the frustration of being sidelined, who knew what it meant to rebuild from nothing. We ended up running together that day, and Bennett naturally slowed his pace to match mine, never making me feel like I was holding him back. The conversation flowed as easily as our synchronized footsteps. Bennett told me about his work as a mechanical engineer, his passion for outdoor adventures, and his goal to complete a full Ironman by the end of the year. I shared my background in graphic design, my love for reformer Pilates, and how I was slowly learning to balance pushing myself with respecting my body's limits. "That's the hardest part," he said as we crossed the finish line together. "Knowing when to push and when to pull back. Most people never figure that out." After the race, we grabbed coffee at a little cafe nearby. Bennett ordered his usual black coffee and immediately started mapping out training plans on napkins, talking about elevation gains and split times with the kind of enthusiasm most people reserved for their favorite TV shows. I found his passion infectious, even if I couldn't keep up with all the technical details. "Would you maybe want to train together sometime?" he asked as we prepared to leave. "I mean, if you're interested. I know you're recovering, but having a running partner makes everything more fun." I said yes without hesitation. Looking back now, I wonder if that was my first mistake, but at the time, it felt like the beginning of something beautiful. Our early days together were everything I thought a healthy relationship should be. Bennett would pick me up for morning runs, always bringing an extra water bottle and making sure we took walking breaks when my knee started to ache. We'd spend weekends hiking local trails, with Bennett carrying most of our gear in his massive backpack while I focused on enjoying the scenery. He introduced me to rock climbing at an indoor gym, patiently teaching me proper techniques and celebrating every small victory like I'd just conquered Mount Everest. I showed him my favorite Pilates studio, where he gamely attempted reformer classes and laughed off his obvious lack of flexibility. "I look like a pretzel that's been tied wrong," he said after his first class, stretching his cramped hamstrings in the parking lot. "A very attractive pretzel," I replied, and we both burst into laughter. Our weeknight routine was perfect. I'd finish work at my design firm around 5:30, and Bennett would usually be home by 6 from his engineering job. We'd cook dinner together, Bennett handling anything that required precise timing while I managed the creative touches. He'd tell me about the bridge project his team was working on, and I'd share the latest client drama from the advertising world. After dinner, we'd take my 2 rescue dogs, Milo and Luna, for long walks around the neighborhood. Bennett had fallen in love with them almost as quickly as I had with him, often sneaking them extra treats when he thought I wasn't looking. "They're good judges of character," I told him one evening as both dogs settled on the couch beside him. "Then I must be doing something right," he replied, scratching behind Luna's ears. Those were the golden days, when Bennett's drive and enthusiasm felt like motivation rather than judgment. He'd wake up at 5 a.m. for his workouts, and I'd drowsily kiss him goodbye before rolling over for another hour of sleep. When I got home from my Tuesday and Thursday Pilates classes, he'd have dinner started and want to hear all about what we'd worked on. "Your posture is getting so much better," he'd say, watching me move around the kitchen. "I can see the difference in how you carry yourself." He wasn't wrong. Between the Pilates, our weekend adventures, and the steady return to running, I felt stronger and more confident than I had in years. My knee was healing well, and my physical therapist had cleared me for more intensive activities. But looking back, I can see the seeds of our later problems were already there, hidden beneath all that support and encouragement. Bennett never seemed to need rest the way I did. After a full day of work and an evening workout, he'd still have energy to plan our next hiking trip or research new training techniques online. Meanwhile, I'd be ready to collapse on the couch with a book or a mindless TV show. "Don't you want to be productive?" he'd ask when he'd find me reading fiction instead of the business development books he was always recommending. "This is productive," I'd say, holding up my novel. "It's helping me relax." He'd give me this look, not quite disapproving but not quite understanding either. Like he was trying to solve a puzzle he couldn't quite figure out. The first real red flag appeared about 8 months into our relationship. I'd been fighting off a cold all week, nothing serious but enough to make me feel drained and achy. On Saturday morning, instead of our usual 6-mile hike, I suggested we stay in and maybe watch a movie. Bennett's entire demeanor changed. The easy smile disappeared, replaced by a tight expression I'd never seen before. "You've been tired a lot lately," he said, not meeting my eyes. "Maybe you need to adjust your sleep schedule. Get more consistent with bedtimes." "I think I just need one day to rest and recover," I replied, genuinely confused by his reaction. "I'll be ready to go tomorrow." But Bennett had already started putting on his hiking boots. "I'm going to do the Pine Ridge Trail. It's only 4 miles, but I need to get some elevation training in." The way he said it made it clear that my decision to rest was somehow disappointing, maybe even wrong. I spent that Saturday alone, feeling guilty for being sick and wondering if I really was being lazy or if Bennett was being unreasonable. When he returned that afternoon, sweaty and energized from his solo hike, he seemed to have forgotten about our earlier tension. "You should have come," he said, showing me photos from the trail on his phone. "The views were incredible. Maybe next time you can push through a little discomfort. Fresh air usually helps with colds anyway." I nodded and agreed, but something had shifted. That small interaction planted a seed of doubt that would grow larger over the coming months. The pattern started slowly. If I slept past 7 a.m. on weekends, Bennett would make comments about wasting the day. If I chose to skip a workout because I was tired, he'd suggest that maybe I needed to build more discipline. If I wanted to spend an evening reading instead of going for a walk, he'd ask if I was feeling depressed. "I'm just concerned about you," he'd say when I tried to bring up how his comments made me feel. "You used to be so active and motivated. I don't want you to lose that." But I wasn't less active. I was still working 40 hours a week at a job I loved, maintaining our apartment so it was always clean and organized, doing Pilates twice a week, and joining Bennett for most of his weekend adventures. The only difference was that sometimes, I needed to recharge. The situation escalated about a year and a half into our relationship when I came down with what turned out to be a mild case of bronchitis. I'd been feeling run down for days, but kept pushing through until I woke up one morning with a low fever, an earache that felt like someone was stabbing me with an ice pick, and a voice that sounded like I'd been gargling gravel. "I think I need to call in sick today," I croaked to Bennett as he was getting ready for work. He paused in the middle of tying his shoes and looked at me with that expression again, the one I'd learned to dread. "Are you sure? Sometimes it's better to power through these things. Keep your routine going." "Bennett, I can barely speak, and my ear feels like it's on fire. I think I actually need to rest this time." He finished tying his shoes in silence, kissed me goodbye with obvious reluctance, and left for work. I spent the morning sleeping fitfully, then moved to the couch to rest and maybe do some online shopping for my friend Chloe's upcoming bachelorette party, which I was helping to organize. When Bennett came home for lunch, he found me exactly where he'd left me that morning. "Still on the couch?" he asked, though his tone tried to sound casual. "I've been resting, like you're supposed to do when you're sick," I said, too tired to hide my irritation. "Right, of course. I just thought maybe you'd feel up for some fresh air by now. There's this farm about 20 minutes away that has great walking trails. Even in light rain, it might help clear your sinuses." I stared at him in disbelief. "Bennett, it's 38 degrees outside, I have a fever, and you want me to go walk around a muddy farm in the rain?" "I'm just trying to help," he said, but his voice had that edge that meant he was getting defensive. Sometimes you need to push through discomfort to feel better. The rest of that day was tense and cold. Bennett moved around the apartment with an energy that felt aggressive, cleaning things that were already clean and organizing drawers that didn't need organizing. Every few minutes, he'd glance over at me on the couch with this expression that made me feel like I was doing something wrong just by existing in my current state. By evening, I couldn't take it anymore. "What is going on with you today?" "I'm sick, Bennett. I'm allowed to rest when I'm sick." "Nothing's going on," he said, not looking up from the kitchen counter he was wiping for the third time. I just think sometimes you give in to things too easily. Your body is stronger than you think it is. Giving in to things? I have bronchitis. You don't know that. You haven't even been to a doctor. That night, I lay awake thinking about all the times Bennett had made me feel guilty for needing rest, for having human limitations, for not being a machine that could go full throttle every waking moment. I thought about my childhood, about parents who had taught me that my worth was tied to my productivity, and how I'd spent years in therapy learning that rest wasn't laziness, it was necessary. I'd worked so hard to develop a healthy relationship with my body after my knee injury, learning to push when I could and rest when I needed to. But Bennett's reactions were slowly eroding all that progress, making me second-guess every moment I chose comfort over achievement. The next morning, I woke up feeling even worse. My fever had spiked during the night, and the room spun when I tried to sit up. I managed to text my boss that I needed another sick day, then collapsed back into bed. Bennett brought me orange juice before leaving for work, a gesture that should have felt caring but somehow felt conditional, like he was checking a box marked supportive boyfriend duties without actually feeling supportive. I spent that second day thinking about our relationship, about the patterns I was starting to see. Bennett's love felt increasingly dependent on my performance, on my ability to match his energy and enthusiasm at all times. When I was strong and active and ready for adventure, he was warm and attentive. When I showed any signs of human frailty, he became distant and critical. That afternoon, I called my best friend Natalie to talk through what I was feeling. "He wants you to go hiking when you have a fever," she said, incredulous. "Violet, that's not normal. That's not how people who love you are supposed to react when you're sick." "But maybe he's right," I said, hating how uncertain I sounded. "Maybe I do give up too easily sometimes. Maybe I could push through more than I do." "Listen to me," Natalie said firmly. "You are one of the strongest people I know. You came back from a serious injury, you rebuilt your fitness from nothing, you work full-time, you take care of your dogs, your house, your relationship. You are not lazy. You are not weak. And anyone who makes you feel like you are doesn't deserve you." Her words hit me like a revelation, but I wasn't ready to hear them yet. I was still hoping this was just a rough patch that we could work through. When Bennett came home that evening, I tried to have a serious conversation about how his reactions to my need for rest were affecting me. "I feel like you get disappointed in me whenever I'm not operating at full capacity," I said carefully. "And it's making me feel bad about myself, even when I'm sick." Bennett's response was immediate and defensive. "That's not true at all. I'm just trying to motivate you because I care about you. I don't want you to settle for less than you're capable of." "But Bennett, sometimes less than full capacity is exactly what I'm capable of. Sometimes I need to rest. Sometimes I need to be gentle with myself. And I'm not stopping you from resting," he said, his voice rising slightly. "I never said you couldn't rest. You don't have to say it directly. Your whole attitude changes when I'm not being productive. You get cold and distant and critical. I think you're reading too much into things," he said, turning away from me. "I'm going to go for a run." And that was it. Conversation over. He left me sitting there, still sick and now also feeling like I was crazy for perceiving things that he insisted weren't happening. This became our pattern over the following months. I'd try to address the issue, and Bennett would either deny that there was a problem or turn it back on me, suggesting that maybe I was being too sensitive or looking for problems that weren't there. Meanwhile, my health issues were becoming more complex. In addition to the lingering effects of my knee injury, I'd started experiencing episodes of syncope, fainting spells that my doctor said were likely related to stress and overexertion. I'd had to surrender my driver's license temporarily after passing out behind the wheel in a parking lot, which was terrifying and embarrassing. The fainting episode seemed to trigger something even deeper in Bennett. Instead of being concerned about my health, he seemed frustrated by this new limitation, this evidence that I couldn't just push through everything with willpower and determination. "Have you talked to your doctor about whether this is psychological?" he asked after I'd had to sit down suddenly during a grocery store trip. "Psychological?" I repeated, stung by the implication. "I mean, sometimes our bodies react to stress in ways that seem physical but are really mental. Maybe you're not challenging yourself enough, so your body is creating reasons for you to rest." I felt like he'd slapped me. "Bennett, I literally passed out while driving. This isn't me being dramatic or lazy. This is a real medical condition." "Of course," he said quickly. "I didn't mean it like that. I just think maybe you're focusing too much on the symptoms instead of building resilience." Building resilience. As if I hadn't already been through more physical and emotional challenges in the past few years than most people face in a decade. That conversation happened on a Thursday evening. On Saturday morning, I woke up feeling particularly drained, probably from the emotional stress of constantly defending my basic human needs to the person who was supposed to love and support me unconditionally. "I think I'm going to take today slow," I told Bennett as he was getting ready for what looked like a major outdoor adventure, based on all the gear he was assembling. The familiar look crossed his face, that expression of disappointment and barely concealed irritation. "You had a whole evening to rest yesterday," he said. "And you went to bed at 9:30. "Right, and now I need a slow morning." "That's how rest works, Bennett. It's not a one-time transaction where 8 hours of sleep erases all stress and fatigue. I just think you've gotten into this pattern where you use feeling tired as an excuse to avoid challenging yourself." Something in me snapped. Maybe it was the months of having my reality questioned, or the exhaustion of constantly having to justify my basic needs, or the slow realization that this wasn't going to get better on its own. "An excuse?" I said, my voice louder than I'd intended. "Bennett, I work 40 hours a week. I do Pilates twice a week. I keep our home clean and organized. I take care of 2 dogs. I plan our social activities. I recovered from a serious injury and built my fitness back up from nothing. What exactly am I avoiding?" "You're avoiding your potential," he said, and I could see that he genuinely believed this. "You have so much more capacity than you're using. I've seen what you can do when you really push yourself. And what if this is my full capacity right now? What if managing a chronic health condition and rebuilding from an injury and maintaining a job and a relationship and a household is actually me operating at 100%? Then maybe you need to expand what 100% looks like." I stood there looking at him, this man I'd thought I loved, and realized that he saw me as a project to be optimized rather than a person to be cherished. Every weakness I showed him, every human limitation, was evidence of failure rather than an opportunity for compassion. "I'm going back to bed," I said quietly. "Not because I'm avoiding my potential, but because I'm tired and I deserve to rest when I'm tired." "Fine," Bennett said, shouldering his hiking backpack. "I'll be at Bear Mountain if you change your mind and want to do something productive with your day." After he left, I did go back to bed, but I couldn't sleep. I lay there thinking about the person I'd been before Bennett, the person who had learned, through therapy and hard experience, that self-care wasn't selfish and that listening to my body wasn't weakness. I thought about my grandmother, who had survived the Great Depression and World War II, who had raised 5 children while working as a seamstress, and who had always told me that the strongest people were those who knew when to bend so they wouldn't break. "Rest is not a reward for work completed," she used to say. "Rest is what makes work possible." Bennett returned that afternoon energized and glowing from his solo hike, full of stories about the trails and the views and how great it felt to push his limits. He seemed to have completely forgotten about our argument, or maybe he was hoping I had. "How are you feeling?" he asked, but there was something perfunctory about the question, like he was asking because he was supposed to, not because he actually wanted to know. "I'm feeling like we need to have a serious conversation about our relationship," I said. The good mood visibly drained from his face. "What do you mean?" "I mean that I don't think you respect me, Bennett. I don't think you respect my judgment about my own body, my own needs, my own limits. And I can't live with someone who makes me feel guilty for being human." "That's not fair," he said. "I do respect you. I respect you so much that I want you to be the best version of yourself. But your version of my best self apparently doesn't include rest, or recovery, or accommodation for health issues, or any acknowledgement that I might know my own body better than you do." We talked in circles for an hour, with Bennett insisting that he was being supportive and me trying to explain how his version of support felt like criticism and control. Eventually, we reached the same impasse we always did, Bennett refusing to acknowledge that his behavior was problematic, and me feeling crazy for suggesting that it was. That night, I made a decision. I was going to start documenting these interactions, keeping track of what was actually happening so I could stop questioning my own perceptions. If Bennett was right and I was being oversensitive, then I'd have proof of that. If I was right and this was a pattern of behavior, then I'd have proof of that too. Over the next few weeks, I started paying closer attention to Bennett's reactions to my normal human needs. When I slept until 8 a.m. on Sunday morning, he made 3 separate comments about losing the whole morning. When I chose to read a book instead of accompanying him to a CrossFit class, he suggested that maybe I was getting depressed and should see a therapist. When I had to cancel dinner plans with friends because I was having dizzy spells, he asked if I was sure I wasn't just anxious about socializing. The pattern was undeniable. Anytime I prioritized my well-being over productivity or performance, Bennett's warmth and affection noticeably decreased. He wasn't cruel or openly hostile, but he became distant, mechanical, like I'd disappointed him in some fundamental way. The breaking point came about a month later, when I was organizing Chloe's bachelorette party. I'd been working on the details for weeks, coordinating with 8 other women, booking restaurants and activities, managing a group chat that seemed to explode with new messages every few minutes. On the weekend before the party, I woke up feeling completely overwhelmed and exhausted. Not physically exhausted from exertion, but emotionally and mentally drained from managing so many moving parts while also handling my regular responsibilities. I think I need a day to just decompress before next weekend, I told Bennett over breakfast. Maybe we could skip the farmer's market and just have a quiet day at home? Bennett set down his coffee mug with more force than necessary. You've been planning a party, Violet. It's not exactly manual labor. Mental labor is still labor, I said, trying to keep my voice calm. And I've been doing it on top of everything else I normally do. Right, but you chose to take this on. You volunteered to plan Chloe's party. And now you want to cancel our plans because party planning is too stressful. I'm not canceling anything. I'm asking if we can have one low-key day before a very busy weekend. Bennett stood up and started aggressively loading the dishwasher, slamming plates and glasses with barely controlled irritation. Fine. Stay home and rest. I'll go to the market by myself. Again. What do you mean, again? I mean this is becoming a pattern with you. You commit to things and then back out when they require effort. You make plans and then decide you're too tired to follow through. I felt like I was being gaslit. Bennett, when have I backed out of plans because I was too tired? Last month when we were supposed to go to that concert with Dave and Jennifer. You said you had a headache. I did have a headache. A migraine that lasted 3 days. And the hiking trip with your coworkers that you canceled the day before. Because I was having syncope episodes. My doctor specifically told me not to do strenuous activities until we figured out what was causing them. There's always something, Bennett said, and the contempt in his voice was unmistakable. There's always some reason why you can't push through, why you can't just deal with a little discomfort. I sat there in stunned silence, finally hearing what he really thought of me. In Bennett's mind, my chronic pain was me being dramatic. My fainting spells were me being weak. My need for rest was me being lazy. My human limitations were character flaws that I could overcome if I just tried harder. I think you should go to the farmer's market, I said quietly. And I think when you come back, we need to talk about whether this relationship is working for either of us. Bennett left without another word. I spent the morning crying, not just from sadness but from relief at finally seeing the situation clearly. This wasn't about me being too sensitive or him being concerned about my potential. This was about fundamental incompatibility in how we viewed health, rest, and what it meant to support someone you loved. When Bennett returned from the market, he seemed calmer, maybe even a little apologetic. He'd brought me flowers, which felt like a peace offering. I think we both said some things we didn't mean, he began, settling next to me on the couch. Actually, I think we finally said some things we did mean, I replied. And I think we need to be honest about what that means for us. What followed was the most honest conversation we'd ever had about our relationship. Bennett admitted that my health issues made him uncomfortable because they reminded him that he couldn't control everything through effort and willpower. He said that watching me rest triggered something in him that felt like panic, like if he let himself slow down even a little bit, everything would fall apart. I know that's not fair to you, he said, and for a moment I thought we might actually be getting somewhere. But I don't know how to change it. I don't know how to be okay with stillness. Then you need to figure that out, I said. Because I can't live my life trying to prove to you that I'm worthy of love and respect. I can't keep defending my basic human needs to the person who's supposed to be my partner. Bennett nodded, tears in his eyes, and promised to work on it. He said he'd start therapy, that he'd examine why rest felt so threatening to him, that he'd learn to see my self-care as strength rather than weakness. For a few weeks, things seemed better. Bennett made an effort to bite his tongue when I chose rest over activity. He even suggested a few low-key date nights, movies at home with takeout instead of elaborate outdoor adventures. But I could see that it was forced, that he was performing acceptance rather than actually feeling it. The facade finally cracked during Chloe's bachelorette weekend. I'd worked incredibly hard to make the party perfect, coordinating a spa day, dinner at Chloe's favorite restaurant, and a night out that hit everyone's comfort levels. The weekend was a huge success, but by Sunday night I was completely depleted. I came home to find Bennett cleaning the apartment with manic energy, vacuuming carpets that were already clean and reorganizing closets that were already organized. How was the party? He asked, not looking up from scrubbing the kitchen sink. It was great, I said, dropping my overnight bag by the door. Exhausting, but great. I think I'm going to take a bath and go to bed early. Bennett's scrubbing intensified. It's only 7:30. I know. I'm really tired. You were just at a spa for 2 days. I felt that familiar twist in my stomach, the recognition that we were about to have another version of the same fight we'd been having for months. Bennett, a bachelorette party isn't the same as rest. I've been on for 48 hours straight, managing 8 different personalities and trying to make sure everyone had a good time. I'm emotionally and socially drained. Right, but you also got massages and facials and sat by a pool. It's not like you were doing hard labor. Emotional labor is still labor. Everything is labor to you now, Bennett said, finally looking at me with undisguised frustration. Work is labor, socializing is labor, planning things is labor. When did you become someone who treats every activity like it's some huge burden? I became someone who recognizes that all activities require energy, and that energy is a finite resource that needs to be managed, I said, my own anger finally rising to match his. When did you become someone who thinks acknowledging human limitations is a character flaw? I think you use your limitations as an excuse to avoid anything that might challenge you or push you out of your comfort zone. And I think you use productivity as a way to avoid dealing with your own emotions and insecurities. The words hung in the air between us, harsh and true. Bennett stopped scrubbing the sink and turned to face me fully. Maybe we just want different things, he said quietly. Maybe we do. That night, I lay awake thinking about what I actually wanted in a partner. I wanted someone who would bring me soup when I was sick instead of suggesting I go for a hike. Someone who would celebrate my achievements without immediately pushing me toward the next goal. Someone who saw rest as a gift I gave myself rather than a sign of weakness. I wanted someone who understood that love wasn't about optimization, but about acceptance. The next morning, Bennett and I had another conversation, this one less heated but more final. We both admitted that we'd been trying to change each other instead of accepting who we actually were. Bennett needed someone who shared his drive for constant achievement and activity. I needed someone who understood that strength sometimes looked like knowing when to rest. I do love you, Bennett said as we sat across from each other at our kitchen table, the morning light making everything look softer and sadder. But I think I love the version of you that I wanted you to become more than the version of you that you actually are. And I think I've been trying to love you by becoming someone I'm not, I replied. Which isn't fair to either of us. We decided to take a break, with Bennett staying at his friend's place for a few weeks while we both figured out what we wanted. But even as he packed his things, I knew this was really the end. You can't build a lasting relationship with someone who sees your humanity as a problem to be solved. The first week after Bennett moved out was strange and quiet. I'd grown so accustomed to feeling guilty about every moment of rest that I didn't know how to relax without his disapproving presence. I kept expecting him to walk through the door and ask why I was reading instead of doing something productive. But gradually, I remembered what it felt like to listen to my body without judgment. I slept until 9 a.m. on Saturday without feeling guilty. I took a hot bath in the middle of the day because I wanted to, not because I'd earned it through prior activity. I spent an entire Sunday in my pajamas, reading and doing crossword puzzles and absolutely nothing that could be considered achievement-oriented. It felt revolutionary. My friend Natalie came over that second week with wine and takeout from our favorite Thai restaurant. You look different, she said, studying my face as we settled on the couch with our food. Lighter somehow. I feel like I can breathe again, I admitted. I didn't realize how much energy I was spending on defending myself and questioning my own instincts. That's what happens when someone makes you feel like you have to justify your basic needs, Natalie said. You start to doubt everything about yourself. Over the following weeks, I started to rebuild my sense of what was normal and healthy. I remembered that most people didn't need to earn rest through productivity. Most people didn't view their partner's illness as a personal inconvenience. Most people understood that love meant accepting someone's whole self, including their limitations. Bennett and I met for coffee a month after our break began. He looked good, energized in that familiar way, and told me about a new hiking group he joined and a marathon he was training for. I told him about the book I was reading and the cooking class I'd signed up for. You seem happy, he said, and there was genuine warmth in his voice for the first time in months. I am. Are you? Yeah, I think I am too. I've been thinking a lot about what you said, about using productivity to avoid emotions. You might have been right about that. Are you seeing a therapist? I am, actually. She's helping me figure out why I get so anxious when I'm not constantly doing something. Apparently it goes back to some childhood stuff with my dad always pushing me to achieve more. I felt a flash of sadness for both of us, for all the ways our past traumas had collided and created pain in the present. I'm glad you're working on it. I'm sorry, Bennett said suddenly. For making you feel like there was something wrong with you for needing rest. For making you defend yourself when you should have been able to just be human without explanation. Thank you, I said, and meant it. I'm sorry too, for not communicating better about what I needed and for staying in a situation that wasn't working for either of us. We talked for another hour, easier than we had in months, both of us finally free from the pressure of trying to change each other. When we hugged goodbye, it felt like closure rather than loss. 6 months later, I'm writing this story not from a place of bitterness, but from a place of gratitude for everything I learned about myself and what I need in a relationship. I'm dating someone new now, a teacher named David who brings me tea when I have a headache and suggests we order pizza and watch movies when I've had a long week. The first time I told David I needed a day to rest, he asked if I wanted company or if I'd prefer to recharge alone. When I said I'd like company but nothing active, he showed up with ingredients for soup and a stack of board games. "Perfect day for being cozy," he said, kissing my forehead and settling in to make us lunch. That's when I knew what healthy love actually looked like. Looking back, I can see that Bennett wasn't a bad person, just someone whose approach to life was fundamentally incompatible with mine. He needed constant motion and achievement to feel secure. I needed balance and the freedom to honor my body's signals without judgment. Neither approach is wrong, but they can't coexist in a romantic relationship without one person constantly compromising their well-being for the other's comfort. The most important thing I learned from this experience is that love shouldn't require you to apologize for being human. The right person won't see your need for rest as laziness or your health issues as inconveniences. They'll see them as part of who you are, deserving of the same care and respect they'd want for their own struggles. I still work 40 hours a week. I still do Pilates twice a week. I still keep my home clean and take care of my dogs. But now I also rest when I need to rest, without explanation or apology. I sleep in on weekends sometimes. I take sick days when I'm actually sick. I say no to plans when I'm overwhelmed, and I don't feel guilty about any of it. The syncope episodes have become more manageable as I've learned to listen to my body's warning signs instead of pushing through them. My doctor says that stress was likely a major contributing factor, and reducing the constant tension of defending my basic needs has made a significant difference in my overall health. David has been incredibly supportive through my ongoing health journey. When I had to go for more tests recently, he took the day off work to drive me to appointments and sat in waiting rooms without complaint. When the results showed that my fainting spells were related to a minor heart rhythm issue that could be managed with medication, he researched everything he could find about the condition so he could better understand what I was dealing with. "You don't have to become an expert in my medical issues," I told him one evening as he read through printouts from cardiology websites. "I want to understand what you're going through," he said simply. "How can I support you if I don't know what you're dealing with?" It was such a stark contrast to Bennett's approach, which had been to minimize and question my health problems rather than try to understand them. My relationship with Bennett taught me that some people see vulnerability as weakness, and others see it as humanity. Some people view a partner's struggles as inconveniences to be managed, while others see them as opportunities to show love and care. I've learned to identify the difference early in relationships now. When I started dating David, I was upfront about my health issues and my need for balance between activity and rest. Instead of seeing these things as red flags or problems to be solved, he saw them as information that would help him be a better partner. "Everyone has stuff," he said when I nervously explained about the syncope and the chronic pain from my old knee injury. "The question is whether you're willing to work with someone's stuff or whether you see it as something they should fix before they're worthy of love." That perspective has changed everything for me. I no longer approach relationships feeling like I need to hide my human limitations or apologize for having needs. I don't try to prove my worth through constant productivity or performance. The night I finally decided to end things with Bennett for good, after our coffee meeting where we both acknowledged the relationship was over, I went home and called my grandmother. She's 87 now and still sharp as a tack, still full of the wisdom that has guided me through every major decision in my life. "Grandma," I said, "how do you know when someone really loves you?" "Oh, sweetheart," she said in that voice that always made me feel safe. "Real love isn't about what someone wants you to become. Real love is about who someone helps you remember you already are." She told me about my grandfather, who had died when I was 12 but who I remembered as gentle and steady. "Your grandfather loved me when I was strong, and he loved me when I was weak. He loved me when I was productive, and he loved me when I needed to rest. He never once made me feel like I had to earn his care." "That's what I want," I said, tears running down my face. "I want someone who loves me even when I'm not performing or achieving or pushing myself to my limits." "Then don't settle for anything less," she said firmly. "Life is too short to spend it with someone who makes you feel like you have to apologize for being human." That conversation gave me the courage to fully let go of the relationship with Bennett and to believe that I deserved better. It also helped me recognize that love, when it showed up in the form of David, who has never once made me feel like my worth was conditional on my productivity. 3 months ago, I had a particularly bad week health-wise. The syncope episodes returned temporarily due to a medication adjustment, and I had to take several days off work. In the past, with Bennett, this would have been a source of tension and criticism. I would have felt guilty and defensive, constantly justifying my need for rest and medical care. With David, it was completely different. He checked in with me throughout each day, bringing me meals and making sure I was staying hydrated. He researched gentle activities we could do together that wouldn't trigger my symptoms. When I felt frustrated and scared about the setback, he listened without trying to fix anything or minimize my concerns. "This sucks," he said simply when I broke down crying after fainting in our kitchen. "I'm sorry you're dealing with this. What can I do to help?" No suggestions about pushing through it. No implications that I was giving in too easily. Just acknowledgement of my experience and an offer of support. That's when I knew I had found what I'd been looking for all along, someone who saw my struggles as part of life rather than as character flaws, someone who wanted to help carry the load rather than criticize me for having one. I think about Bennett sometimes and hope he's found someone whose approach to life matches his, someone who shares his need for constant motion and achievement. I hope he's learned to be gentler with himself and with others who move through the world differently than he does. But mostly, I think about how grateful I am for everything that relationship taught me about my own worth and what I deserve in love. Before Bennett, I thought I understood the importance of self-care and setting boundaries. But I had never really tested those beliefs against someone who fundamentally disagreed with them. Living with someone who saw my human needs as weaknesses forced me to either abandon my values or fight for them. Choosing to fight for them, even when it meant ending a relationship I had hoped would last forever, was one of the hardest and most important things I've ever done. It taught me that love isn't about finding someone who never challenges you, but about finding someone who challenges you to grow in directions that honor who you actually are rather than demanding you become someone you're not. The woman who posted that original Reddit question 6 months ago was someone who had lost touch with her own instincts, who was constantly second-guessing her most basic needs because someone she loved was telling her those needs were wrong. She was someone who had internalized the message that rest was laziness and that human limitations were character flaws. I'm not that woman anymore. I'm someone who understands that taking care of myself isn't selfish, it's necessary. Someone who knows that the right person will support my self-care rather than undermine it. Someone who has learned that true strength sometimes looks like knowing when to rest, when to say no, when to choose gentleness over pushing through. My knee still aches sometimes, especially when the weather changes. I still have syncope episodes occasionally, though they're much better managed now. I still need more rest than some people, and I still have days when chronic pain makes it hard to do everything I want to do. But none of these things feel like failures anymore. They feel like parts of myself that deserve compassion and accommodation, not judgment and criticism. They feel like information my body is giving me about what it needs, rather than evidence that I'm not trying hard enough. David and I have been talking about moving in together, and I find myself excited rather than anxious about sharing space with a partner again. I know that if I have a bad health day, he won't see it as an inconvenience or a sign that I'm giving up. I know that if I need to sleep in or take a day to recharge, he won't make me feel guilty about it. Last weekend, I woke up feeling particularly tired after a busy week at work. Without even thinking about it, I told David I needed a slow morning. "Perfect," he said, settling back into bed with his coffee and a book. "I was hoping you'd say that. I've been looking forward to a lazy Sunday." That moment felt like a small miracle. Here was someone who not only accepted my need for rest but actually shared it, someone who saw slow mornings as a gift rather than a waste of time. We spent that morning reading in bed, taking the dogs for a gentle walk around the neighborhood, and making an elaborate brunch together. It was the kind of day that would have made Bennett antsy and critical, but David seemed to savor every peaceful moment. "This is my favorite kind of day," he said as we sat on the porch afterward, watching the dogs nap in a patch of sunlight. "Mine too," I said, and realized how long it had been since I'd been able to say that without feeling guilty. If I could go back and tell that woman who posted on Reddit 6 months ago anything, it would be this: trust your instincts. If someone's love feels conditional on your performance, if you find yourself constantly defending your basic human needs, if you feel like you have to earn rest and care through productivity and achievement, that's not love. That's a transaction. Real love sees your humanity and embraces it. Real love doesn't ask you to be perfect or tireless or endlessly strong. Real love shows up when you're sick, when you're tired, when you're struggling, and it doesn't make you feel guilty for needing support. You deserve someone who brings you soup when you're sick instead of suggesting you go for a hike. You deserve someone who celebrates your achievements without immediately pushing you toward the next goal. You deserve someone who sees rest as self-care rather than laziness. Most importantly, you deserve someone who loves the person you actually are, not the person they think you could become if you just tried harder. I found that love, and it was worth every difficult conversation, every moment of standing up for myself, every painful realization about what I would and wouldn't accept in a relationship. The journey to get here wasn't easy, but it taught me that I'm worth fighting for, even when the person I have to fight is someone I love. My grandmother always told me that the strongest people are those who know when to bend so they won't break. For too long, I thought that meant always compromising, always accommodating, always putting other people's comfort ahead of my own needs. Now I understand that sometimes bending means setting boundaries. Sometimes it means saying no. Sometimes it means choosing yourself, even when it's hard, even when it disappoints someone else. Bennett wanted me to be stronger, but his version of strength would have broken me. David helps me remember that I'm already strong enough, exactly as I am. That's the difference between someone who loves their idea of you and someone who loves you. 6 months ago, I thought my partner's inability to accept my need for rest was a problem I needed to solve. Now I understand it was information I needed to receive about our fundamental incompatibility. Some problems in relationships can be worked through with communication and compromise. But when someone sees your basic humanity as a flaw to be corrected, that's not a relationship problem. That's a them problem. And you can't love someone into seeing your worth. The best thing I ever did was stop trying to convince Bennett that I deserved rest and care and accommodation for my health issues. Instead, I found someone who never questioned whether I deserved those things in the first place. That's my message to anyone who's in a relationship where they feel like they have to defend their basic needs. You don't. The right person won't make you prove that you're worthy of love and care. They'll just love and care for you, because that's what love actually is. My partner no longer gets triggered when I rest, because my partner understands that rest is a necessary part of being human. And I no longer need to get him to overcome anything, because I found someone who was already there.